So we've been talking about trouble here in our broadcast for the last few weeks. And trouble, Scripture talks about in this world, you shall have tribulation. And of course, tribulation is trouble. And just looking at Scripture and getting a direction as far as how to deal with trouble. And that's the very first step, is it? You have to figure out exactly what the trouble is. You have to be able to identify it to such a degree that you're not confusing it with a lot of other stuff. In other words, this is the problem, and this is how we deal with it. And so then we talked about this last week about what God said to Moses. He said, "What's that in your hand?" And so you look around, you see your resources. And I brought this to bear last week, and I tried to make the point very, very strong that our greatest resource is our ability to believe God in faith. That's our greatest resource. But then I look at scriptures such as we find in the book of James, where James says that a double-minded man is unstable. And I think that's important to keep that in mind, that a double-minded man is unstable. And of course, James goes on to say, well, he's unstable in all of his ways. And indeed, that's true. But I'm also mindful of the scripture in Proverbs, where it tells us that where there is no vision, the people will perish. In other words, if there's no clear, concise vision of how to be able to deal with life and life circumstances and the direction in which we feel like would be right for us to follow. So, I've given you this very, very simple advice about dealing with trouble. First of all, you got to identify it. Secondly, you got to figure out how you can look around and see what it is that God would have for you to be able to deal with the trouble. Resources that God has, that He will put them in your hands, but He wants to test our faith. And it's very, very important that we understand that God is going to challenge us, and He's going to test us when it comes to our faith and ability to believe that He is what we need Him to be in our time of need. The truth of the matter is that this advice is very, very good in a crisis. If you have a crisis situation that arises and you got to make up your mind really, really quick, you got to make some very, very quick decisions. And first of all, you identify exactly what the situation is. You look around, you look for your resources to be able to solve the problem, and then you go. And I have found this to be very, very helpful. As I've walked through this walk and lived this life, I've been many, many times when I've had just exactly that philosophy in a time of crisis. But it also works very, very well in the day-to-day life in which we live. This very succinct concept that I've got to get on top of the crisis. I can't allow the crisis to identify me. I have to identify the crisis. And then I have to figure out, okay, God, where are you in all of this? And then put my trust in who He is. This is Pastor Jack King with the gospel on the radio broadcast.